Hello, everyone.
Hello there.
Hey, Coach.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Long time no see.
Indeed. Will and I met for the very first time ever in real life last week. Was
Yeah, it
it?
was on Thursday, I think.
Oh, so a week today. We
Yeah, a
had
week
a,
from
a
today.
nice long, like, bro sesh, I would say.
Oh, we definitely had a bro sesh, very upper body oriented bro sesh at at a nice gym. It was great. Very much enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, let's let's jump in. So Coach Will, how do you pronounce your last name? I have never heard you say it out loud. Brenseke.
That was perfect. Yes.
Amazing. So Coach Will Brenseke is here with us. Will, tell us, like, if somebody asks you at a barbecue, what do you do? What do you tell them?
Uh, I tell them I'm a strength and nutrition coach. Um, I kind of work with everybody. I work with general population clients. I work with athletes. Um, I just like to get people strong. I like to get people more fit. I help people improve their diet. That would be the fastest elevator pitch that I could probably give somebody.
Love it. And you do a combination of things. You do individual programming for folks. You do pretty high touch support for some of your athletes. You do more hands off support and programming for others. And you also work at a gym doing group fitness classes.
Yeah, so I feel like I do encompass like the whole gamut of fitness, at least on the strength side of things. I think nutrition will be a little bit more niche than my training experience, but training is definitely the whole spectrum from very detail oriented, high touch one on one, both in person and online. I do online programming somewhere in the medium touch range, maybe like once every other week, I will check in with the client. And then I also have clients that, we don't check in for 3 months. They're a doctor, they have lots of other things going on. We just, here's a program, they follow it. When they're done with it, they check in with me and say, hey, I'm ready for another program. So, from the programming standpoint, the full spectrum. And yes, I do also work in person. I do part-time coaching for Orange Theory Fitness as a group fitness instructor as well. So kind of getting all of the different aspects of fitness, which I really enjoy. I like having a wide spectrum of clients and being able to work in both one-on-one and kind of group coaching settings.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you are in New York area, you could probably pop in and actually get Will to coach you in an Orange Theory class, which is pretty awesome, you have to admit, because not a whole lot of like online coaches also have this like in-person opportunity, just like pop in and experience person in real life too. So I'm
Yeah,
just
if
saying.
anybody lives in New York, if you're in New York City, the Park Slope Studio, come on in, hang out. I do also have a contract with a like regular kind of CrossFit boxy gym if you were interested in one-on-one coaching instead of doing a group fitness thing. So that is also an opportunity, if you wanted to meet, if you wanted to get to know me, if you are interested in working together, like I do have both of those options if you're a New York City dweller.
I say that because I mean, it's been years since there was an opportunity to do that. Like for me, like I used to teach yoga. So like I could say like I'm at this studio, find me on the schedule and just show up for a class, right? And it's been kind of years since someone was able to do that. And it's kind of nice to actually just have that. Like, hey, there's this location of this gym and Will works here and we can kind of like just see you and have you coach and then work with you one on one potentially.
Yeah, I think that's a fun thing for people to be able to like kind of just stop in.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, for
like you're
sure.
saying, the online coaching thing, I feel like the online space is very interesting. Uh, you know, it's almost at a certain point you don't feel like a real person when you're just working online. You're like, this is like my virtual space, and you don't really have much, person to person interaction. So, like, I've actually had people that I've known for years, just like yourself, where like I've never met them in person. And then the first time that they do meet me is at Orange Theory rather than like a one on one coaching setting where they just come in. I'm like, hey, wait a minute, I know you. So,
There has been some recent rumors that I'm actually AI generated. So, I mean,
well,
some of us will never know, but Will, can you confirm?
when you gave me a hug, you didn't phase through me. So
It's
You're not a
true.
hologram. You are made of flesh, which was interesting. I did have to poke you a few times and make sure it was real, but it was real, which was nice.
I am real. Well, so for those of you joining us today, if you're on camera, we love to see it. Always lovely to see faces. So hello, I see Cethel and Kat, Harvey, hello. Chelsea's here and Lisa, hi. If you are somewhere where you're listening in, always cool. If you want to pop on camera, we love seeing faces, but never any pressure. You can also participate through chat. Hey, Paul, thank you. So can kind of pop in and type your questions there. I have a couple of questions that I'm gonna throw at Will, maybe like rapid fire style, and see if we can confuse him, but I doubt it. But I think there's one question in my mind, Will, that I think everyone is just dying to know. Mostly me, mostly me. I'm everybody. I'm dying to know. What is it like having me as a client?
Well, I will admit there's probably more crying than I thought there would be at the beginning of it. If we're being brutally honest here,
I asked.
well,
I did ask.
you did
I
ask. Uh, but I think a lot of the times it's a good thing. You know, I've loved working with you like ever since we first kind of connected. I know we were talking the other day about, when was the first time we really connected? And it was a long time ago. If we were to look back, it was probably 2016, somewhere in the coaches chat, or somewhere in the coaches group on Facebook. And like you said, you probably just like DM'd me one day. And I would love to go back and see like what the exact date on that was, because I do know that you reached out to me first. But
Yes.
this is actually our second installment working together, right? Like we worked together through your second pregnancy, and then you took a break and then you came back. And it's been a pleasure. You have some unique challenges that I enjoy programming around. I think that anytime you get an interesting case, or you get somebody who is like very serious about their athletics, but also has life challenges, maybe dealing with an injury, it makes you think as a coach. And it's not just, the easy clients are the ones that they have no injuries, they have no restrictions, they have nothing going on, they're 20 years old, and they're just like in the prime of their athletics, and it's just, okay, follow the program and you're going to get really strong, or you're going to get really fit. So I really enjoy working with somebody who has some unique barriers or unique challenges. And then you being a very experienced coach, like we get on our calls and you do half the coaching yourself. You're like, it's been a nice, and fun experience, but yeah, definitely more tears than I thought in the beginning that we were ever going to have, but I'm all here for it. I'm happy that you feel comfortable to like express yourself.
I did ask. I did ask. So there you go. Uh, I like Will. He's brutally honest. This is why. So, Will, I kind of figured we can chat about a couple of things today, and uh, mostly I thought we would kind of talk about the opposite of what is often the big topic in health and wellness. Like it's sort of it's weight loss, it's fat loss, it's sort of getting smaller in one way or another. And I actually wanted to chat more about weight gain and muscle gain, and what does that look like, and what does that take, maybe from the training perspective, from the nutrition perspective. Is that something that you would say like you specialize in? I know you're passionate about it, just even from personal experience, but also helping people with it. Like, or is the majority of your clients are still kind of in weight loss goals, or are they getting stronger? Like, are you consider yourself like a weight loss coach or a muscle gain coach?
I probably wouldn't consider myself any of those things like in silo, where I would probably just say that I do both of those things, and it's a pretty even mix in terms of the clientele that I have. But I will say, for my personal experience, I think the muscle gain, the weight gain portion of things, that's where I have probably a more unique perspective and something to add outside of like the expertise and knowledge I have working with other people, and like through my studies, because that has been my personal path for the last decade, maybe a little bit longer than that. So I think anytime that you can bring personal experience to the table, it might add a little something. So if I was to say I would specialize a little bit more at something, it probably would be the weight gain or like strength performance client that's looking to add more muscle to their frame, because that is not only what I do with a lot of clients, but it's also what I've done for myself.
Yeah, to make everybody cry, along with me here. And well, I actually don't know if I shared those numbers with you or not before we started working together. But everyone on the call, as a health coach, you will be appreciate the pain of what I'm about to share. So I did a Dexa scan to look at the like body fat percentage and like muscle composition uh, before and after having kids. So to give you an idea, after having children, after having like weaned children from breastfeeding, my body fat percentage was exactly the same as it was before. I think it was like in the low 20s somewhere, but I was 20 pounds lighter after having kids. Yeah, yeah, that face, like, exactly. So in terms of like gaining weight and gaining strength and putting muscle back on, um, I'm very interested. Yes, Paul's like, oh my God.
Yeah, the chat is blowing up right now. Like, oh my God, wow.
Yeah, that's they literally just ate me alive. Like they ate muscle right off of me. So well, how do you think, like, how do you approach the two clients differently? Like, even if we're thinking of somebody maybe who is the same, like maybe we have two women same age, right? Like maybe similar barriers, similar life challenges, but one is looking for weight loss and one is looking for weight gain. Like right off the bat, what is the same, if anything, and what is different as how
Uh,
like, you would coach them?
yeah, great question. I actually am going to say something that might be surprising to many people, but from a training perspective, they're almost entirely the same. I would not program differently or like conceptualize program differently for a weight loss client or a fat loss client compared to somebody that is trying to gain the maximum amount of muscle size that they are trying to gain or trying to maximize their strength performance.
Men or women?
Men or women, because my approach is very much over the course of the first few months of working with somebody, my ultimate goal is to tailor their training in terms of the overall dose of training and the type of stimulus that they're getting to provide the necessary stress to get them stronger or to get them wherever their goal is. So if everybody is trying to get stronger, whether or not they're getting, fat loss as a secondary goal or they're trying to gain muscle, like if their overall training program is set up the same way because they're both trying to improve strength performance, regardless of if they're trying to lose body fat or gain muscle, that program is going to look very similar. However, if you looked at the differences from individual to individual, that's where you might see differences in like overall volume, exercise selection. And that more so has to do with how they respond to their training. Not everybody's going to respond to the same amount of volume the same. Not everybody is going to respond to the same intensity ranges the same proximity to failure to the same. So what is actually on paper will look different, but the initial process is not going to be any different for the two of them. I wouldn't say that muscle gain clients require more volume than fat loss clients, because you might work with somebody who can handle a crap ton of volume and now all of a sudden they're a fat loss client having more volume than your muscle gain clients. So I think it's important to monitor performance of everybody, because overall a good strength and conditioning program should be having demonstrable increases in strength and performance. Like you should be getting stronger from your training. That is what strength training is. Like fundamentally, if you're doing some sort of load-based exercise, the way that you tell if it's working or not is if you are able to improve the load or you're able to improve your overall work capacity. So overall, I'm just trying to tailor the dose specific to every single person. So we'll increase or decrease amounts of sets or number of exercises or the ranges of motion and things like that. All the different programming variables will get tailored to the individual, but I would not approach them at the same, like at the starting point, any differently. It's just going to be, here's a roundabout of what I think is going to work well for you based on what you've told me. And then let's tailor it to you over time.
Yeah, for sure. So Hema is clarifying, like, it's more important to look at strength performance rather than loss gain.
Yeah, because so like muscle gain overall is going to be a pretty slow process. And it takes quite a while when you're running a program to tell whether or not the person is actually gaining muscle size. It's not a 1 week, a 2 week thing. It's a 5, 6, 7, 8 week thing, possibly even longer than that, to see noticeable differences in size. Performance, on the other hand, should be trending upward in like a 2 to 3 week period of time. And if you're on a program and your performance is increasing, there are many reasons why that can happen. But one of the major reasons that happens is because of an increase in muscle size. Muscle size is not one-to-one directly like correlated to strength performance, but there is a pretty strong correlation there. So I know a program is working for somebody if they're having demonstrable increases in performance. And over time, it's just the overall exercise volume, especially strength training volume that they have, that's going to help improve their muscle size. So, and again, whether or not they're a fat loss client or they're a muscle gain client, their programming is not going to be approached very differently. The diet portion of things is going to really determine like how much weight is lost or gained. And then there might be some caveats in there that I guess I'll throw out just because people in their minds are probably thinking, but wait, what about these scenarios? If a person is in a very large calorie deficit, that's when I would start to consider, are we actually going to see major improvements in strength performance or muscle size? No, probably not. So when the person is trying to be pretty aggressive with their fat loss, that's when things would change. And I'm more so looking for their subjective feedback about things like fatigue, soreness, maybe interruptions in sleep, like some other sort of feedback to tell whether or not the dose of their training is correct. If they're having recurrent injuries, probably going to have to dial back the dose of training because their calorie deficit is making it too difficult to recover. So there are other things to consider in there, but at the starting point, I would not approach them differently from a programming standpoint.
And when you say, like, when you talk about the initial process, right? Like initially, like we are talking, I think you've mentioned that, like it's not a week, it's probably initial couple of months, right? Like, or however, initial couple of blocks of training that would really allow you to see how is the person moving, how are they, they might be sending you form videos, they might be giving you feedback like, whoa, that was too much, like you said this weight and that I couldn't do the prescribed number of reps, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the things I'm looking for when I first start programming for somebody is first, I'll get an assessment of obviously what their goals are, any injuries, limitations, things of that nature, their schedule, their time constraints, uh, and then what they enjoy. If they have a training background already, I want to know what movements they enjoy, what they don't, so that I can program around those things. And then I will put together I like to call it a preliminary program because a lot of the times in the first month or so, like lots of variables are going to need to change anyway. But I'll put together an initial program, they'll start. And then as they're executing the first few weeks, the things that I'm looking for are first technique review videos. I need to make sure that they are performing the exercises as I intended in my head. And if they're not, making adjustments to that. Two, um, making sure that their rating of the proximity to failure, whether you're using reps in reserve or RPE or some other subjective scale of, how hard was this set, making sure that my vision of it from the external and seeing things like bar speed, movement speed, those kinds of things match with what they're saying. If somebody tells me, hey, this was 4 reps in reserve, but very clearly they were not going to get another rep, there's a mismatch there and we need to adjust that because the loading ranges are going to be a pretty big part in whether or not this person gets stronger or not. And maybe contrary to popular belief, you don't actually need to be working super close to failure for a strength training program. I'd actually prefer them to be, I'm sure you see in your programming a lot of the times it's like 3 reps in reserve. I don't necessarily want them to have all their volume at an absolute grinder all the time where they're having super slow bar speeds and you're grinding out reps and their form is starting to suffer. So those are the things I'm looking for in the first few weeks to maybe a month or two of programming. And then over that time, once those things are dialed in, the other things I'm looking for are their feedback about like, what are they liking about their program? What are they not liking about their program? In general, now that their exercise technique is improving and they're kind of now actually executing what's on the paper, are loads going up? Are they able to handle more training volume? That's how I'm going to assess their performance after the first initial few weeks.
Yeah, and I think with that duration piece, I mean, I don't know how like typical or atypical I am of a client, but when I first reached out to Will, this was years ago now, and I asked about kind of how he structures his coaching. And at the time, and I'm sure this has changed since, well, but at the time he said he would do it month to month. And I say, forget it, can I pay for a year? Like, can I actually pay for a year in advance? Because I wanted that long-term support, and I knew that strength and kind of like building muscle and takes a long time. And also, I will say, at any point today, like if you feel like the example or the details of my training or situation are helpful in any way, please feel free, because we do have explicit consent of a client, right? Like in this particular, and that same goes for anyone here. If you want to kind of ask me anything about this particular coaching experience, that we kind of have this little bit of a unique setup right there. But me reaching out to Will initially has been very much like, hey, I have this shoulder injury. I want to get back to my sport, which is obstacle racing. So that's a lot of upper body work. Oh, and by the way, I'm 12 weeks pregnant. So there's that too. Oh, and by the way, I also have seasonal depression. So I get really, really sad and mopey in the winter, which is, I think, where a lot of crying has come from, at least that round. That was kind of like our setup. I'm curious in the chat, or just feel free to raise your hands too, how many people here on the call actually do exercise programming for their clients? Like, you design workouts or you lead people through workouts. And as you're doing that, I want to pop in and shoot a question from Cethil to Will. And then I see a couple of you have your hands up. So Cethil is asking a question to Will: how much exercise is too much exercise for women? Like, is there an upper time limit to prevent loss of menstrual cycle due to over exercising? I understand that it might differ from person to person, but should women with lower body fat percentage exercise less? Did we lose Will? We just lost him. The most important person on the call has disappeared. Let me just pop into the chat here. So I'm going to be on the lookout for Will to come back, and we can chat about that before that. Yeah, your question was too weird. He was like, forget that. I'm out of here. Yeah, so Lisa says trainer, health coach here. So Lisa, you do workouts for your clients. Harvey is saying, I'm very curious about adding in exercise program into my coaching, but don't do that yet. Awesome. Yeah, amazing. So that's that would be a very cool combination then to have that. Hema designs workouts. John's a trainer. Kate, also trainer, health coach. Paul switching to his phone. So John is asking, how do we mitigate things like form with online clients and keeping them honest? Yeah, that's a great point, John. That's a great question too. Will was actually talking about like form improving, and like right off the bat, like how do we know if someone's form is improving if they're an online client? So one of the things that Will does, he asks people to submit videos of their form so he can actually make comments and adjust. Will, we were nervous there for a second. Welcome back.
Happened.
There you go. You're a little robotic, a little bit. I think you're back. Chelsea is just starting training. Physique athlete. Oh, okay, cool. So Chelsea is a physique athlete. John's adding Pilates for in-person, and Hema says do videos also. Great way to check the form. How do they share those videos? Yeah, so this is really kind of dependent on the coach's preference. So what Chelsea's saying, I've shared videos with coaches via Google Drive, and now I'm using WhatsApp. Exactly that, Chelsea. Like, so what you've described there is probably the most common way of doing that. So either Google Drive, like here's your folder. So sometimes a coach would like create a designated folder for each client. So like Will has a folder called like Kate S, right? And that's where my program would live. And if I had any videos to submit, I would just upload those videos in there. Hema says Google Drive as well. And because WhatsApp allows you to attach little videos, WhatsApp is another option as well.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better, Will.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I'm going to hope that this works for now. I actually am hotspotting from my phone now. For some reason, my Wi-Fi went out. They might be doing like work outside. The joys of living in New York City.
I was
But
gonna say, you're in Brooklyn. If your internet is like that, there's no hope for any of us, just in terms of the
yeah,
internet.
I don't get me started on the internet. Optimum, you need help. But
So Cecil was very worried that her question was too weird and you disappeared.
yes, no, I did not disappear on your question. I promise you that. Let's see if I can full screen this again so I can see the question again. I believe the question is asking about like an upper limit of tolerable exercise for women.
Correct. Specifically, like just to prevent any loss of menstrual cycle due to over exercising. And what Cecil was specifically wondering, like if women have lower body fat, should they be exercising less than women with high body fat, like out of the concern of not losing their menstrual cycle?
So, granted, I think I should preface this with I am not an expert on the menstrual cycle or women's health in particular, but I am pretty confident that most of the research points to menstrual cycle loss being a result of like energy availability, meaning the total amount of exercise activity that you have versus overall energy intake versus like your basal metabolic rate and all the underlying processes that have to happen. There's a balance here. And if exercise takes up too much of that, of your energy intake, you're now going to downregulate some unnecessary processes in terms of like normal physiology. So I would say from a strength training perspective, the likelihood of you losing your menstrual cycle from just strength training volume is probably pretty low. You probably would not reach that upper limit with just strength training because that would be probably quite a large volume of training and you probably burn yourself out before you reach that point for some other reason, right? Like maybe that just wouldn't be a tolerable level in general. Your volume would be so high that it really just would not be feasible to follow that program. When you start adding in cardiovascular exercise, because now you have a higher energy expenditure for that type of exercise, the risk probably goes up. And I believe this plays out in the real world when you work with athletes, people that are doing higher volumes of cardiovascular exercise. They tend to get this sort of like relative energy deficiency of sport more often than strength athletes. Strength athletes are probably at the lowest risk of this. So I don't think that there is a number that I can put on anything in terms of an upper limit of exercise. I think that when you're programming for somebody, the thoughts going through your head should be, is this person receiving a dose of exercise that improve their performance in the thing they're trying to improve? So if they're trying to become more cardiovascularly fit, then they need to have enough cardiovascular training to improve that. Same for strength performance. You need to have enough strength training. Your strength training variables need to be in place and they need to be demonstrating an improvement in performance. There's going to be a range of this is the minimum amount that they need and this is the maximum amount that they can tolerate. And you're probably going to get some signs that it's not a tolerable level of training before they reach the point of losing their menstrual cycle, specifically with strength training. So that's kind of where my head is at with that. If you're working with an athlete that is also kind of concomitantly doing some sort of endurance exercise, now I think you need to be monitoring feedback like overall fatigue, soreness, weight loss, maybe body composition has something to play into it. Maybe leaner athletes are going to be a little bit more at risk. But I think that really just paying attention and kind of asking good questions and doing all the things that you would normally do as a good coach is going to guide you more than any kind of number or guideline that I can give you, because this is going to be super individual to the person. I would probably say that it would be a worse idea to kind of reduce somebody's exercise volume for fear of them developing this rather than reacting to it. So I'm a huge proponent of people doing as much exercise as they can tolerate. I would not kind of preemptively reduce somebody's exercise because I think they're going to have this problem. I would more so say if they develop this problem, we have to adjust. And the variables that you probably would adjust would be their overall exercise volume and their energy intake. So it's kind of on the back end of things. And I think that that pretty much aligns with how the research states to do things as well. It's just like if somebody develops these problems, then you need to pull back on X, Y, or Z. I don't think that saying, hey, here's this limit and you're never going to go above it is really useful, because what if the person can tolerate that and they end up getting better results? They have better fitness, their health improves even more by going above that range. You would be, for lack of a better way of putting it, harming that person because you are holding them back from things that they could otherwise do and not have an issue.
Yeah, and I think, Will, to your point, also, you were saying how individual this is. I'm actually wondering if this variability is higher for women because of the hormonal differences, right? Like, so for like, if you're working with male clients, is there like a comfortable window of body fat percentage that you could aim for? And the reason I'm thinking that and I'm wondering that is because I know, like, working with female clients, working with women, um, for some women, their bodies hate going below 20% of body fat, which is lean, but it's not that lean. Like, it's not like ultra lean. So sometimes a female client might have a goal of hitting 15% body fat, and she hits 19 and her body goes haywire, and her menstrual cycle becomes irregular, and we're kind of getting all the signals that her specific body hates being at that body fat percentage. So do we push it to 15? I guess we could, like, for the sake of it, but that's rarely advisable. And for other women, they might be perfectly comfortable and healthy at 16% body fat, at 14% body fat, if they have like just a thinner, slimmer frame, and their hormonal health seems to be completely on point. So notice, like, the range there could be plus minus 10% of body fat, right? Like, that's a very large window. Like, Will, I don't know, like, would you say that that window is kind of like smaller and tighter for men? Like, can we just get all the guys under 15 pretty reliably?
I would say, but not confidently say that that is probably correct. Like, if I was to speculate, I would say, yeah, probably on average, women have less tolerance there. But there's also this thing where, so you have to weigh the cost of all these kinds of things. The loss of your menstrual cycle is something that you have to weigh individually. If you're going for an extreme athletic event and it requires you to be doing that amount of training, be that lean, then you have to ask yourself, is this something that is worth it to me? I don't believe we found any long-term consequences to somebody losing their menstrual cycle. It's like when you bring their energy intake back up and reduce exercise volume, they generally get it back and they don't have any long-lasting effects outside of, if you do that for too long. Now you're talking about like the chronic issues that almost develop when somebody is malnourished, right? Like, you're going to have lower bone density. You might be at an increased risk of injury. So the time course matters. But in general, for men, we do sometimes see, and this is like a pretty well documented phenomenon of like low testosterone in the setting of not over exercise, but just like very high exercise volumes. If you went out and tested marathon runners, they're on a higher likelihood of like having clinically low testosterone. However, the consequences of that low testosterone don't seem to play out compared to somebody that actually has, like clinical hypogonadism that is causing symptoms, right? Like, the athletes that get there because of their athletics don't tend to have symptoms compared to people who get there from a non-athletic reason. However, women losing their menstrual cycle, the magnitude of that just might be bigger in terms of like societally, or like your own personal beliefs, or maybe the effect that it has on you in terms of your performance, where like for men, they might not even know that they have low testosterone. There's no sign. There's no, signal to them that this is going on. It happens. If you test their blood, you can find that out, but it doesn't really matter much. Their performance doesn't suffer. They don't have like infertility or anything like that. So I just think that because there's this very large signal to women that like, hey, something's going on here, I lost my menstrual cycle, it makes it a bigger issue, a bigger deal than compared to men.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Anything else? Any other questions that are popping up for folks when it comes to like strength training, programming, gaining weight, losing weight? Well, I'm actually curious, like, so you and I have never worked on weight loss, I don't think, outside of like, I just gave birth. So, like, postpartum, right? Like,
Weight is just coming off.
well, I mean, not for everybody, but
Well,
like,
for you specifically, I remember you messaging me multiple times, be like, "Hey, my weight's down to this now." I'll be like, I don't remember us ever talking about weight loss specifically, but like, if you're happy with this, then I'm happy with this. So it's like, cool, keep going.
He made it very annoying for me. It's like, hey, my weight is this, and how do you feel about it? I was like, right. So, but we never worked on weight loss directly. I'm curious because we are definitely not working on weight loss right now. We're working mostly on strength. How would, like, if I were to come to you tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm kind of feeling like I want to lose 5 pounds before the beginning of the running season in May, like, would you change anything like in our work together? That is, and you spoke to that a little bit earlier, like strength wise, or not necessarily? You would really just kind of guide me to changes in my nutrition.
It would more so be guiding you through changes in your nutrition. I don't suspect that with that amount of weight loss, you would notice any, depending on the time course, you probably would not notice any difference in your ability to tolerate volume. You would probably not notice a difference in your performance. And I also would not expect that your performance would not increase with that amount of weight loss. I think
Right.
things get a little bit more dicey when somebody has a much more extreme weight loss goal, especially if they have the amount of exercise history that you do, right? Like if you're working with somebody who's brand new, who's significantly overweight, and they've never really trained before, even if that person goes into a significant deficit, I would not suspect that they can't improve their strength performance throughout that process. It kind of would be, we're just doing these things at the same time. But for someone that's starting in your place, it would most certainly be almost 100% just based on your nutrition. I would not change anything about your programming until we had a clear signal that, or at least suspected pretty strongly that it's now influencing your ability to train. Even something as simple as, hey, in order to lose this 5 pounds, I'm eating less, obviously, and I'm feeling hungry in my workouts. You know, the time of my work, I can last an hour, but an hour and 15, I'm starting to get really hungry. So it's like, okay, maybe we shorten the session a little bit, or, you know, we have to time your meals differently, or some other thing that might be related to nutrition and somewhat adjacent related to your training. But I would not immediately adjust the dose of your training because you want to lose 5 pounds.
Right. And I think you're also alluding to something that often comes up as a question when people are asking, like, so can I lose fat and gain muscle at the same time? And it's one of those, like, it depends where you're starting in many cases. Can you speak to that a little bit? And then Maribel has a question after.
Yeah, for sure. So this is absolutely going to be like depend on your training age. Like I said before, somebody who's brand new, has significant amounts of body fat, never really trained before, pretty clearly, both like anecdotal experience, but also in the research, they can gain muscle mass and lose a significant amount of body fat at the same time. They're just like primed to be very sensitive to a strength training stimulus. A lot of the excess energy that they're going to be expending comes from their body fat stores. So as long as they're eating in a way that supports muscle growth, which is probably a wider range than many people think, they're going to be able to do both at the same time. And that kind of just diminishes and diminishes over time to the point where if you're at maybe where I would be, like if I was to try to do this at the same time, or if you were to try to do this at the same time, it would happen, but it would happen at a rate that is so slow that it would feel like you are turning your wheels and going nowhere. And then at that point, I would say, let's separate out these processes. Let's do them individually. If there is some sort of body recomposition that happens on the way, that's fine. But I would absolutely recommend doing like one or the other and then switching focuses and kind of reversing that process. Just because from an efficiency standpoint, like if you just ate at maintenance all the time and you just trained really hard, yeah, you'd probably gain a little bit of muscle mass and lose a little bit of body fat. But it wouldn't be nearly to the significance of if you did 12 or 16 weeks of a hypertrophy related or like oriented program and eating in a surplus and then doing a dedicated period of time of fat loss. Like you just would not get the same results. So for anybody that has multiple years of training experience and maybe has gone through the process of dieting a few times, I try to separate those out as much as possible and do them in distinct phases.
Even though we do want to do a powerlifting competition and run a marathon at the same time.
It's
The
funny you say that.
nightmare, the
I
nightmare
have
goal, right?
I have clients that are like, in the middle of this powerlifting prep, I have like a 14-mile Spartan race. And I'm like, cool.
Cool.
Which one do you care about less? Like which one is less important to you right now? Because we probably can't do both at a super high level unless you are like 6 standard deviations to the right of the bell curve. And then it's like, well, then cool, you're a freaky athlete and you can probably do anything. But like for most people, they're going to be somewhere in the middle. And it's like, what do you care about more? Do you want to be
Well,
really
and you
strong?
notice it's kind of it's either pick one, right? As he was saying, pick a goal. Like which one do you care about more? Or it's like, okay, don't pick, but then you have to make peace with mediocre gains and results in both, right? Like we're sort of maybe okay, kind of shitty in both of those things, compared to what it could have been if we actually picked a lane.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love like something you said to me when you first came to me was like, I want to feel prepared to do like pretty much anything should I want to, like that doesn't mean that you are going to have elite performance in all of these things, but you just want the physical capacity to be able to, hey, there's a Spartan race tomorrow and 6 weeks from now, there's a powerlifting meet. And then like, there's this CrossFit kind of thing that I like want to try. And okay, cool. If you feel like you are a well-rounded athlete and you can go and do all those kinds of things and that's what fulfills you, that's great. And I am in full support of that. But it's the moment that you say to me, I want to qualify for nationals in powerlifting, but I also have the Spartan race going on. I'd be like, okay, let's hold on here a minute. Let's pump the brakes and back up and say, now you're aiming for a specific performance. We have to make sure that we manage all the things that may detract from that because I nor you want to get to the end of this thing and be disappointed and say, I could have done more. I could have done something else. So that's when the conversations start to change with certain clients that have multiple goals or maybe different seasons of the year they do different sports.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that I always kind of try to point out, there is often this like separation, which I think is arbitrary when we start talking about like we coaches and they clients. And that's not a thing. I don't believe that's a thing, right? Like, because we are all humans and I hire a coach and I client the hell out of myself there, right? Like, so very regularly. Well, I think I've might have emailed Will a couple of months ago and I said, tell me it's a stupid idea to do this, attached link to an Olympic lifting competition as I'm trying to rehab my shoulder. He goes, yep, thank you. That was it. That was
Yeah,
the
just
exchange. That was the post.
please confirm that this is a bad idea. It's like, can confirm, bad idea.
Is it stupid? Yes, right? And it's really just like, I sort of knew that, but I also have a shiny thing syndrome because I'm human and I like shiny things. So it's really, and at the same time, like my definition of success from the very beginning and my definition of my fitness is that allows me to just do like random stupid things, not dumb but stupid. And that is kind of my personal benchmark, right? Like my motto is that I do stupid, I don't do dumb. So my most recent thing, and I have asked Will this a week ago, I said, would it be stupid or dumb if I just decided to row a half marathon on an indoor rower like concept two? When? December 31st. He's like, I mean, no, I think you'll be okay. Like, do you have some aggressive goals? I'm like, no, I'm going to bring a burrito. I'm going to take 4 hours to do it. He's like, you'll be fine. Right. And it's really that it's kind of helping like ourselves, like moderate where we are there. So I want to go to Maribel. Maribel, go ahead. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, hi. I just have a quick question. So, when it comes to patients and, well, not patients, I'm sorry, I'm in the medical field. I always consider patients. When it comes to clients, do you look at clients and take a history of them, and if they are like chronic clients with like chronic conditions, do you reconsider taking them on? Or do you still take them on and just kind of revamp or modify their kind of what you're going to do for them? The reason I'm asking is I want to really like help clients with chronic conditions. I have a chronic condition myself, so I kind of want to see where I navigate through this, and I'm not exactly sure how to go about it.
And Maribel, can we clarify? So when you talk about chronic conditions, do you have any
Yeah,
particular ones in mind? Because I think we could argue that like most
yeah,
people have a chronic condition of some kind, right? Like some being more.
Yeah, so my biggest, I mean, there are a lot of like diabetes, hypertension. So my biggest thing is I have RA. So a lot of times it's really difficult to do certain things, and flare ups with joints, and medications is a really big thing. Like the weight, sometimes you have to get on medication and you balloon up 17, 20 pounds and so quickly, and getting that back down is horrendous. So that's also so difficult. Like 3 years ago, right before COVID, I did a Spartan, and then my RA flared up, and I just can't get back to where I was, and it's so hard.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I don't know if will someone take me on, and or say, oh hell no, I'm not going to deal with that crap.
so
You
Maribel,
know.
I'll pass this off to Will, and I want to distinguish here what you're asking. I mean, first, like that sounds incredibly frustrating. I'm really sorry you're having to deal with that. As somebody who wants to get back into a Spartan race, I can somewhat relate. But I think what you're asking here, if a prospective client has a chronic condition,
Yeah.
would someone like Will, would a strength coach take them on? And in this case, would Will take them on? And Will, as you're answering that question, I'm actually hearing like there's a distinction here between the chronic conditions we're talking about, because I think what Maribel is alluding to is not so much chronic conditions like diabetes or high blood pressure. They're more flare-uppy chronic conditions, like I'm thinking fibromyalgia, MS, RA, that are very like they can be very acute in a very unpredictable fashion that would impact like functioning and performance. Like how do you think about this, Will?
Yeah, for sure. Maribel, first of all, yes, just like Kate said, I'm sorry that you are dealing with all of this. This is clearly a frustrating experience for you, as I'm sure anybody in your position would be frustrated. And to have activity, things that you enjoy stripped from you, and trying to make your climb back up the mountain, it has to be very difficult. So I'm sorry that you're dealing with that. I can say personally, I do not shy away from taking on clients that have chronic conditions. I have worked with clients before that have such chronic conditions. My process with them, or anybody dealing with something that is going to affect their physical capabilities at unpredictable moments, and kind of have this more roller coaster ride sort of experience, is very much meet the client where they are at that day. Every day is a different day, and I like to use auto-regulated type of training, meaning the way that your training is prescribed is based on some sort of subjective feedback measure, again, like reps in reserve, RPE, something like that. And I like to communicate with my clients a lot. So as long as we are communicating with each other and we are in agreement about on that day, during that week, during that period of time, what your goals are, whether it be related to your overall health, well-being, the way you're feeling, or if it's more performance oriented, meeting you where you are, because you can only do as much as you can do that day. So if it means that your programming changes, we have to pull back on things because, this joint hurts, I can't do this movement this week. That's fine. We make an adjustment. I am the adjust kind of coach, because ultimately my goal for everybody, if I had to state what my actual goal is as a person and the impact that I want to have, is everyone exercises the most that they can possibly do, because we know how beneficial it is for people in pretty much every state of condition to exercise. And if you have a specific performance goal, then clearly your exercise needs to be directed towards something. But just in general, if we have to pull that direction away for a second and say, let's take a step back, let's just see if we can do something. There's some sort of movement, there's some sort of activity that you can do that will not only move you somewhere, but even if it's just, to make you feel better mentally that day, hey, I just need something to perform because I can't do the thing I want to do, but I don't want to feel stuck. I want to feel like I'm still moving forward. Then we adjust, we communicate, we adjust. And that's how I approach everybody, whether it is someone who has a physical limitation, like a chronic condition, or even an athlete. People that have no condition sometimes will reach out to me and say, hey, today is just one of those days where nothing is getting done. Be okay, it's all right. at the end of the day, 1 day or 1 week is not going to be the end of the world when it comes to your trajectory of where you're trying to get to. The thing that will be detrimental is if you get so frustrated and so down on your like inability to do something that it now cascades into something much larger than that. So I like to empathize with my clients a lot. I like to make sure that they feel like they're being heard and we are taking them on that day into account.
I love that. Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. And somebody was wondering in the communities the other day about like exercising, not necessarily with a chronic condition, but exercising while sick. And one of the things that I said, and again, it might go a little bit against the grain, but I'm pretty sure Will and I are on the same page there. I actually encourage clients to learn how to move their body and how to exercise when they're not feeling well, including when they're sick, because being sick is part of the human experience. And I think that there is something to be said for learning the continuum of movement. You can dial down duration, you can dial down intensity, and you can still move your body because movement will actually heal. Movement will help recovery, not impede it. It is very rare that we are so sick and ill that all things must be paused, right? And we're literally just in bed. And those conditions are usually pretty clear and pretty severe.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement with that. There are very, very few things out there that require legitimate bed rest outside of like you're just post-op, you are debilitatingly sick in the hospital, and even in the hospital, right? Like I'm sure we've all known somebody that was in the hospital when they either got done with the procedure or they are currently dealing with some pretty severe illness. And what do they mostly try to do when the PT comes to them the day after, get out of bed, let's go do this, let's go move. So strict bed rest with zero movement is recommended for almost nobody. There are very, very few cases where that's the case. So there is something that we can do. It's managing the mental side of things and saying, well, what I can do is very far away from what I want to do. And I need to reconcile that somehow. I need to come to terms with that and be okay with that. And that acceptance is probably even more difficult than changing what you're doing movement wise in general.
Absolutely. John, you had your hand for a while. Go ahead.
Hey, sorry, do you mind if I ask you a question about my own personal training seasonally? Is that all right?
Go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's do it.
So I like to power lift, I like to run, and I like to do martial arts. Now, kind of the running, maybe debatable. I had to skip it this year because I sprained my ankle doing black belt testing back in July, which obviously presents one of the potential problems with competing in powerlifting is I've sprained both running and martial arts. The martial arts runs from September to April. And if I do get to a high level, which I don't expect, next year, but like the nationals and provincials and powerlifting are around like December, January. So if I was to throw in a powerlifting meet, would you say I probably want to do that like after a black belt testing, maybe based on how I'm feeling? Or would I want to do it maybe leading up to that to have like a peaking power phase towards that? What do you think? Do both if I'm recovering well? I don't think I would, but
yeah,
my recoverability is something I'm working on, sleep and everything else. But I'm just wondering in my mind, like if I was to do 2 or 3 meets a year, how could I even work that in?
Yeah, for sure. First, that's super badass. Aside from the running, like my own personal background in athletics, like the first sport I ever played or did was wrestling. So like some sort of contact combat sport, and then powerlifting for years. So like that's awesome. Pound it through the little Zoom here that we got going on here. Friends already. Yeah, so I think one thing to consider with powerlifting is that not every single meet that you do needs to be a PR performance. You can have practice meets, you can do meets in the middle of a training cycle. It's more so managing the fatigue and actual like physical at sports. I'm sure that you've noticed multiple times that like things probably hurt while you're doing a combat sport at certain moments, like random injuries pop up. If you're doing any striking, like you don't mind me asking, what combat sport is it?
It's Taekwondo, and so with the black belts, it adds a year. So I have to wait 2 years and then 3 years for the next belt. So there's that too.
Okay, and Taekwondo has striking,
Longer,
correct?
it'll be longer between me having to break boards and smash bricks and things.
Okay, so you might have a little bit easier time recovering now than maybe in years past, but it's managing those variables that I would be considering. And with nationals of powerlifting in October, if you were to compete multiple times a year, it is probably going to overlap, or you're going to have a competition in somewhere in your combat sports season. What I would say is
The nationals are in the combat sports season.
yeah, right. Like it's only a month into the combat sports season. So
I thought it was December. It goes provincials, then nationals.
well, what federation are you talking about?
I'm not sure. I have to decide, I guess. That's one decision to make.
Yeah, like so for example, USAPL historically was having their nationals in October. So I'm most familiar
We're
with
in Canada, if that helps. CPL.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm from the US, so I'm not super familiar with the scheduling of
It's around like December. Provincials are around like November, December, and then I think nationals are in January. And my total isn't at a point where I'd qualify anyway yet, but you know, not far off probably.
yeah, so then I think just in your training, because we know that these things are going to overlap, you probably are going to have to take more of, just like I was talking about before with like managing chronic conditions, take more of a day-to-day approach to your training and have a looser guideline of when your hard training sessions and your easier training sessions are. I have other clients that have lots of different stressors. They do other sports where instead of having a set cycle of days, or instead of following the same training program every week, they might have a bi-weekly setup where there's an A week and a B week. And maybe when you know when your actual combat sport competitions or anything like that is going on, or you know when your hard training sessions for that is going to be, separating out your training weeks and kind of thinking in this longer, more drawn out cycle. Maybe it means you start prepping a little bit earlier and you have a longer peaking phase. All of these things to help manage the fatigue that comes from your strength training, and also managing all of the fatigue that comes from your combat sport training. Mixing your days up, not always doing the same order. For example, let's say you have one squat, bench, deadlift day a week. Everything else is kind of a little bit more spread out. Putting that squat, bench, deadlift day on a different day of the week each week, depending on where your kind of combat sport hardest sessions are, would probably be a good idea, because you need to be the most recovered for those. So maybe you're not following the same 7-day training cycle every time that you're going through the week. That's something that I would consider doing. And it probably would have to do more of a RPE based undulating program. You know, I like to use RPE or reps in reserve as a way of managing not only the load on the bar, but also then we can auto regulate the amount of volume as well. So like on days where you're really tired, putting a cap on terms of time for an exercise, or a cap on how many sets to do, or hey, do this lift first set at RPE 7 and do as many sets as it takes to get to an RPE 8. Maybe one day that's only one more set, and another day where you're high performing and well recovered, it's 4 more sets. So having these little things in your programming that will allow the training dose to adjust based on how tired you are from the other things you're doing would probably be the best idea. And the best way to get the most amount of training in, because if you did,
John, I might be biased here because I'm a coach drinking my own Kool-Aid, right? But I actually would point out, because some of the considerations that Will is throwing your way, you hear how many decisions there are when you're balancing competing goals, right? And we're assuming that one or both of those goals and the outcomes are actually important to you. I actually would argue, in a very biased fashion, that it's the decision making that in this particular instance, at least to me, wouldn't be worth it. Meaning that's where you hire out for somebody to tell you, right? Like, so there's some considerations that we're talking like, hey, John, you might keep this in mind. Here's one thing you might want to do, another thing you might want to do. But this is, to me, really sounds like a perfect scenario for a coach to come in and you say, hey, I want you to do this for me. And that way you can make them decide, right? Like, and I mean, I say that as somebody who, has a 35-kilometer trail race up a mountain in the middle of a strength block, right?
And
Like, so
in
you
terms
kind
of
of have,
time wise too, that might be a better discussion to have in that format. Well, I believe I grabbed your Instagram.
yeah,
Maybe we
yeah,
should have
Yeah, I mean, feel free
that.
to reach out. For anybody here, if I do have multiple coaching spots. If anybody was interested in booking a call, your discovery call is free. And I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody. Powerlifting is definitely one of my wheelhouses, if you will. But to Kate's point about hiring a coach, I'm sitting here giving answers and recommendations and things like that about training in all different capacities. I also have a coach. I do not do all of this stuff myself because I understand the importance of not being able to think. Not having to think so much about my own training and try to manage all these things while managing other clients and all the other things you have going on in your life. I have somebody that I work with that does my programming and tells me, hey, I think this is the best direction for you to go in. Let's follow it for this week and check back in and see how it went. I think that process and kind of offloading all of this thought to somebody else is really useful, because if you're trying to manage all these variables yourself, your own bias is going to get in the way at some point. And I'm terrible. Like, I will say I am terrible at following my own programs. Can write programs for everybody else. When I go to follow my own program, the program changes during my workout.
yes,
So
most coaches. That's exactly it. So, John, if you have trouble finding Will, just find me. I'll make sure I put you two in touch. Will, are you okay to hang back a few minutes because Chelsea has had her hand up? Would it be okay if we ran a little late?
I am perfectly fine with that.
Amazing. So, for those of you still with us, hang with us because we're hanging out. Chelsea, go ahead.
Thank you so much for your time. I just had a quick one, I think. It's relevant to, I'm a recent CPT grad. I did my NASM course. I'm a physique athlete and I've worked with coaches for the last year and a half to compete. And I'm looking to get into coaching. But I see it often that most coaches tend to start with in-person coaching and move to online as a common pathway through coaching. And I am drawn to the idea of online coaching through nutrition and training, mostly because of the accountability factor, and it's what I know and I'm used to. However, I'm hoping to train more Gen Pop and not specifically physique athletes or bodybuilders. And I'm just curious, what would you recommend? I guess, like, if you were to do it all over again and not be in person, if you were looking to start with online, because I think you mentioned going towards online yourself more so now. Do you think that the time spent in the gym coaching people one-on-one is just that valuable to get that type of a mentorship and be in that type of environment before you start doing online coaching?
This is a great question because I have mixed feelings. I'm kind of on like both sides of the coin here. On one hand, I do think that, at least in my own progression as a coach, working with people in person has been very, very like helpful and helped develop my skills as an online coach. But I also will not say that it's necessary and that you can't develop those skills while working online. I think that if, regardless of the setting that you're in, you have a desire to learn how to be effective and efficient with cueing, and you can communicate with people really well, and you're attentive, when it comes to online coaching, the thing that you miss out on most is the actual physical presence, right? When you're there with somebody, you get to see their movement in real time, you get to give feedback to them, you get to have conversation and develop a relationship. Whereas online, in an ideal world, you would be able to do those same things, but once you start working with a lot of people, you'll realize that most of the time with online coaching, the communication is more sparse than when you are in person. You don't have those same kinds of conversations all the time, unless you are having video calls with them, unless you are doing, very high touch kind of situations with people. So I think if you set your business up right, you can learn and be great online. And you don't actually have to have any in-person experience. My answer would be different if you were not an athlete. If you were not somebody who has a large amount of experience in the gym and doesn't have a competing experience, I would probably tell you that in-person would be a necessary part of this. But because you've had a coach for quite a long time and you compete in physique sport, your experience in the gym exists. Like, you are there, you're training, you know what movement should look like, you have a good idea about like what training programs look like already. So For you, it's less about like just getting your feet wet and more about like, okay, what are the finer details that are going to matter about actually having a roster of clients? How do I coach each of these people to get to their goals? You know, how do I set up processes that allow me to the best of my ability, see their movement, see how their program is going, checking in with them. Like those are the pieces of an online business that I find matter a lot. Whether or not you've actually like done any queuing to somebody in person won't matter much.
Right. Yeah, I think to that effect, it's a lot of kind of the imposter syndrome side of things, where it's going, okay, I'm certified, I can do this. And the idea of being in person in a gym, you kind of have that mentorship built in to working directly with other coaches, but striking it on your own is a bit different. So yeah, I think that's a good point, that it can definitely go both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
you know, I think Chelsea, the challenge here will be figuring out which way you're gonna go, because you notice that yes, right? Like as Will
Right.
said, mixed feelings, and yes, it could go both ways. So now what? Right? Like so now that we know that it goes both ways, are you leaning one way or another, right? And I mean, I can speak to how I found Will, right? Because I didn't follow Will on Instagram. I did not see an ad for Will, right? Will did not cold DM me. In fact, I cold DM'd Will and said, "Hi, Will," right? So, and how did that come about? We don't live in the same town. I had no opportunity to run into Will in my local gym. And you notice there is that upside, there's the advantage, because if I join a gym, as I have a year ago, I joined a brand new gym. If I want a personal trainer, they have two. It's this one or that one, right? And there is that automated funnel and stream of clients where I'm not going to look on Instagram for a personal trainer. If I want a personal trainer who is in person, it's going to be, you know, Chelsea or John. Like those are my choices because they're right there, and there is your upside. So how on earth then did I end up with Will? Well, Will is part of the PM coaches group, as I think all of you are, which is why you're here. And Will has shown up consistently for months answering questions of his peers. And any one of you here, I actually suggest, just as an exercise, go to PM Coach's group after this call today or tomorrow and just search for Will's name. Search for his last name. My very initial message, I am convinced of it. We still have to double check this, Will, because we had this conversation. I am convinced that if I were to open up my chat history with Will and scroll all the way to the beginning, my very first message to him is probably, "Hey, thanks so much for awesome responses in our community." That's probably how that started. And I know that because that's how my relationships with, you know, the 24 people that I can immediately think of in a group of 57,000 have started, right? Because they're there, they're consistently helpful, and that's sort of what sets you apart. I'd argue that's harder in some ways than simply being fed clients from the gym that you're at, because Will does not have to impress his Orange Theory clients the same way. They're right there, right? So if they are looking for the one-on-one coach, he probably would be an obvious choice. But if we're mostly online, there is that, like, how do you become the person?
Yeah, for sure. It's on the Orange Theory topic. So for anybody here, whether or not you are a group fitness person or an online person or a one-on-one coach, the way that you develop your skills is trying them and adapting them on as many people as possible. And I have found that group fitness, depending on where you are at, is a great way to just like touch as many people as possible, get your eyes on as many people as possible, and really develop your coaching skills in a way that you can communicate effectively and quickly. And that's one thing about group fitness that is different than all the other kind of coaching scenarios that I've been in. So not that this is like a plug for Orange Theory or a plug for group fitness, but it's more so like finding a way to just coach as many people as you possibly can, whether it is friends and family for free at first, or it is, you know, you get hired at your local gym and you can stand at the front desk and ask if anybody wants a quick movement assessment, or maybe it is online and you just put out a feeler on Facebook and say like, hey, I'm hosting a group fitness workout on my computer. Like, just a way for you to communicate with people and get as many people under your belt as possible. Like, that is going to be the way that you develop your coaching skills. And if you're a nice person, you communicate well, and you have good coaching skills, clients are going to come to you. People are going to seek you out because you are already a cut above most coaches that exist. I mean, being part of the PN community, you're like probably above most coaches that exist, because there are so many coaches out there. Like, the world is tremendous and there are an infinite number of coaches out there, but people are going to pick you because they're going to like something about you. And if you could develop those few things that are likely for them to say, hey, I want to work with you, that all just is going to come from you being with as many people as possible. So just figure out how you're going to do that. If you want to be an online coach, just find a way to communicate with as many people online as possible. Like Kate is saying, the PN group was a great place for me when I was just coming on board as an online coach, because I worked in person for years before I was ever an online coach. And now here's this community where every day 500 questions are being asked that have to do with the thing that I've been working in for years. It was a perfect opportunity to be like, let me meet people, let me explore. And then somebody like Kate stumbles into your DMs and the rest is history. It just flies off from there. So
actually, I really appreciate that, because I've heard people mention group fitness in terms of like monetizing and getting more bang for your buck, because if I train 2 clients, 3 clients, but in terms of experience, that's actually a very, very good point, to build up experience quickly by seeing more people all at once. I love that. Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
More
And
bodies.
thank you, Kate.
You're so
Yeah,
welcome. Well, I am running on limited time because it is time for my Strength 1 workout, Will. And it's now or never.
Look at that, scheduled into the day.
That's right. So, Will, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. It's been awesome to have you. I hope this was helpful. So, so I've shared Will's Instagram. Will, can you pop your Instagram handle into the chat here for folks? I've included that into the intro, and I'll do that again. There we go. So it's just Will Brenseke, like first name, last name on Instagram. So you can, and is that the best way to get a hold of you, Will?
Yes, Instagram is definitely the easiest and fastest way to get a hold of me. If you're in the PN coaches group and you want to send me a Facebook message, that's also fine. I do have a website. I do have a like means of you emailing me, but
don't do that.
Instagram is just as easy. I have a business Instagram, so it is as well set up. You can go right onto my link tree and either book a call, or you can find my website through there if you don't want to DM me. So you have all these options. Instagram is probably the way that you can kind of funnel yourself through any of those.
Amazing. All right. Well, thanks so much again. Thank you for all of you who hung around, and hopefully we will see you next week for another Coaches Connect.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Kate. This was really awesome. It was wonderful to speak my experience to you all. And I hope to hear from you soon. You know, it would be great, even if it's just a, hey, you know, this is what I do. And, you know, it was nice to listen to you talk, or maybe it wasn't. If you're like, hey, I hated everything you said, that's fine too. I accept it.
Okay, let's do it again, Will.
Yes, absolutely.
Bye, guys.
Bye.